Greetings. Welcome to the inaugural edition of the Parleh Sports Betting Show. I'm Jorey Middlestadt, the other bald guy waving at you. That's Harley Redlick, and we're going to be with you each and every week on Canada's sports betting network, otherwise known as the Parleh. As you can see on the screen in front of you, we really want to hear from you. Always send us emails, questions at theparleh.com. You can tweet at us. Our handles are also on the screen. You can use the hashtag ParlehSBS. You ready to go, Harley?
Let's do it, Jorey.
All right. So we want to start by telling you why we're doing this podcast, what our goals are, and why we're the right ones to bring this podcast to you. And the first and most important reason is that single game wagering is now legal in Canada for the first time. And so, Harley, seeing as you're the gambling expert here, tell us why that's important and what it means.
So what it means is the criminal code used to mean that you had to bet parlays in Ontario. You had to bet 3 games and you had to go to a convenience store to bet. In other words, a pain in the ass. Now you can bet a single sport, 1 game. You can bet on just the Leafs on a Saturday night or just the Super Bowl without parlaying it or combining it with other games. And you can bet it mobile. Right now, you can do this in Ontario at the OLG's ProLine Plus. And within a couple months, a lot of private operators, the big names we all know, Fan Kings, Draft Duel, The Score, etc., will likely be in the marketplace. So it's an exciting time to be in Canada when it comes to sports betting, Jorey.
Yeah, and so to put it very simply, you can now bet on a single outcome, where in the past you had to combine at least 3 outcomes or games together to win your bet. And that's a huge, huge bonus benefit for the consumer because it's been legal in most of the world, and we've been lagging far behind. Even the US got ahead of us on this one, but we're going to catch up rather quickly. So our goals now for the podcast, there's really 3, and that is to educate, right? Entertain, and hopefully make you money and teach you how to manage your money. So how are we going to do that? Well, you and I have both listened to the multitude of podcasts that are out there in the market. There's many. Some are better than others. But the common theme is for the almost entirely across the board, they seem to be catered towards either the casual bettor, but somebody who's out there already making wagers, or the more experienced and savvy sports bettor. Nobody seems to be addressing the fact that with single game wagering now legal, recently in the US and here in Canada, that people may want to bet, but they don't even have the faintest idea what betting concepts like point spread or money line or parlays, what those mean, and how and vig or juice and how the books make their money. They really don't understand it, and I think for that very reason, it may prevent a lot of them from getting into the market. We want to help in that regard, right?
I want to help those guys. The truth is, I want to help the sharp bettors also, or the sharp minds. Basically, there's 20 or 30 sports betting podcasts out there, and they're all catered to frat boys that just want to bet pizza money on their favorite team. There's a lot of shock jocks out there saying bet the farm on the Cowboys. Plenty of jock sniffers who think they're experts because they know who the backup center is on the Packers. But there's almost zero real analysis from sharp sports bettors, which, as we'll get to, I am. Zero explaining to sports fans how these markets actually work, which appeals to sophisticated guys, hedge fund banker, accountant types, anybody with an analytic mind that wants to actually understand who's making a line and how they're making money. So I want us to educate, entertain with informed and expert discussion.
That's what we're going to try and do. And then, as I said, we're going to try and win you some money. What does that mean? Harley will make picks on every show. I may chime in on occasion, probably more often than not. I will have some thoughts on particular games. And as we go along, we want to teach you how to manage your money, right? That's super important if you're going to get into this. It's not a haphazard endeavor You want to learn how to manage your money if you're going to wager on sports. And I think, as you'll see, as we explain concepts and making actual bets, we'll talk about how to manage your money as well. So the next question, why us? I'll let you go first because you're the gambling expert. Just tell us a little bit about your background and why you're going to do all the things you just said you're going to.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned bankroll management. It's all about risk management, and that's my background. I was a law MBA, and I quit a six-figure banking job at CIBC 15 years ago, actually to play online poker. And then I transitioned from online poker to ProLine because I found some arbitrage there. Wrote some articles for Ivy Business School and Sun Media on my ProLine prowess. I was described as an ace and their biggest player by their staff. I run websites and Twitter accounts under the handle Sharp Edge Picks, focused on value betting. I was banned by Bet365 for what they call advantage betting or winning too much. Taught gambling law at Osgoode Hall, my alma mater. Created a gaming law certificate for industry professionals. Speak at betting conferences in Canada and in the US. Appear on radio for the Fan 590 and TSN. Write articles on value betting for Yardbarker. I love doing videos. I do a weekly video, maybe a couple videos a week for the parlay. Went 7-4 in the regular season against the spread, betting the NFL. And I'm excited to do this podcast with you, Jorey, the local legend of sports betting radio.
Yeah, well, that may be taking a
local legend, and let's get on to the NFL playoffs discussion.
All right. So very quickly, I will say that I've been a sports bettor now for over 35 years, which means I'm dating myself, which I didn't really want to do, but I'm going to do it. The only thing I can say about my betting prowess is the last time I deposited money into an online account was over 10 years ago. I've been down to my last bet multiple times, but let me just say this. I also have maybe cashed out some money once. So I'm your everyday casual bettor. I'm not a large bettor by any stretch of the imagination. And that's because I learned some hard lessons.
Sorry to interrupt, Jorey. Most casual bettors in the last 10 years have deposited money in their online accounts 20 or 30 times, and if they've withdrawn twice, they consider themselves lucky. You're a lot better than a casual bettor if you haven't pulled the money in 10 years.
I'm not pumping my own tires that much. Trust me, I do know how to manage my money, and that's really been the key. And as you mentioned, I have some experience hosting sports betting shows. About 20 years ago, myself, Steve Rapp, and Randall the Handle were the first to do any kind of sports betting show on radio in this country. Started on the Fan 590. We're there for 15 years. It became a two-man show with Randall the Handle, who I learned a ton from both guys actually over the course of the years. And we were on many stations around the country at different times during those 15 years. So let's just say I've done this before. And just to give you an idea, you can see on your screen the things we're going to cover today. The betting concept / terminology we're going to talk about are point spread, over-under totals, and future bets. And we'll do future bets by looking at the current Stanley Cup odds and the Australian Open, which is not without controversy at the moment. We'll talk about Novak Djokovic, the number one player in the world. We'll talk about the Canadians, and we'll do that a little later in the show. So to get started, by far the largest sporting the largest sport in terms of betting, at least in North America, is the National Football League. And by far. And
even in Canada, Jorey,
yeah.
Anybody who goes to a convenience store in Ontario on a Sunday at noon sees a lineup, people buying potato chips and ProLine tickets, and you don't see that on a Saturday night before hockey. By far, the NFL is king.
And it's Super Wildcard Weekend. I didn't come up with the Super. That's the NFL's marketing team that came up with that. But they're not all that wrong, because we have Saturday games and Sunday games, which are traditional in the first two weekends of the NFL playoffs. But for the first time, we also have a Monday night game. Before we get into actual picks on Super Wildcard Weekend, We want to talk about, as I said, each and every week, we're going to cover some betting concepts as shows roll along. And the beauty of a podcast, you can go back and listen. And the whole thing we did at the beginning, talking about why we're doing this podcast, we're never doing that again, because you can go back and listen to this one. So the first and most important, because it's the most common form of betting, is the point spread. So, hey, give us a quick tutorial on what is a point spread.
I'm going to use an example. The biggest point spread this weekend is the Chiefs. They are a 12.5-point favorite over the Pittsburgh Steelers. So when we look at this matchup, I think we all know that KC.
But I'm going to interrupt. Again, a little more on the point spread. Kansas City's a 12.5-point favorite over Pittsburgh. What does that mean to those who don't understand it?
I'm going to get into what that means. It means that we all know Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes are vastly superior to Big Ben Roethlisberger, who, for all intents and purposes, belongs in a studio with the two of us at this point in his life, not on a football field. And chances are they're going to crush. But we want interesting betting. So what do? We come up with a number. Whether that comes from Vegas, an offshore sports book, one genius, a computer. We're going to get into future shows how a line gets made. The line, or the consensus line, or the point spread is 12.5. That means Kansas City is favored by 12.5 points. Kansas City has to win by more than that number for Kansas City bettors on the 50-50 point spread proposition to be right. So if Kansas City wins the game 20-10, the difference is 10 points. That's less than 12.5. And Pittsburgh Steeler or underdog bettors who bet the Steelers plus 12.5 cash their bet. Kansas City has to win by 13 or more points for Kansas City bettors to win. The idea of the point spread is to be the great equalizer, where approximately 50% of the bets come in on Kansas City, approximately 50% come in on Pittsburgh, because the line makers come out with a line that they think is fair. The line makers make their profit by what they call juice or vig or commission. It's 10%, but remember, it's only on losing bets. So you will usually see lines written as minus 110. That means you're risking $110 to win $100. The ratios keep on working. It's 55 to win 50. Jorey, you want to bet $11, you risk $11 to win 10. So you risk 11 to win 10, and you get back $21 if you pick the correct side. The point spread's viewed largely as a relatively efficient market where you flip coins, 50-50 propositions. A great bettor wins 55, 56% of their bets is phenomenal. The goal is anything above 52.4% covers your commission long term.
That's the magic number. Betting point spread with what they call a 20-cent line, and we'll explain that. But you just talked about minus 110, right? So 10 points on either side, and the goal of the books is to get even action on both sides. It doesn't always work that way, as we'll talk about as we get into some of the games. But 52.4%, if you're betting the point spreads with a regular 20-cent line, so minus 110, you've got to win 52.4% just to break even. And I'm glad you pointed out that, like, if you're doing 57 or 58%, I mean, you're killing it, right?
Almost nobody is doing 57, 58% unless they really, really carved out a niche. I mean, if you want to move to Middle America and study a third-rate college basketball conference and that becomes your life, that maybe you're at 58%, but we'll get into a minute how low your limits are going to be and cover the books. There is nobody who's done 60% on the NFL over the last 20 years, assuming they're betting even 50 or 100 games a year. Like, if your N is over 2,000, you're not producing over 60% on the NFL. The only guys that are doing that consistently are doing it off of what they call stale lines in contests, because the lines move in games. So historically, before the advent of the internet, when there were more stale lines on things, if a quarterback got injured, but you could bet the pre-injured line, obviously even our newbie bettors understand that if Patrick Mahomes gets COVID tomorrow and he's out,
right,
the line's going to move significantly. It moves for a guy like Mahomes. We know what it moved. It happened this year with Aaron Rodgers. He got COVID. That line is going to move 7 or 8 points on Mahomes' injury. The Chiefs are going to drop from 12.5 to 5.5. Now, you want to fudge numbers, and after Mahomes goes out and you want to pretend you got the Steelers at 12.5 because your betting line stays, yes, you could outproduce.
All right, so let's get to it. Super wild card weekend. We're not going to give you picks on every game because Harley's a savvy bettor. And so he's chosen one game, at least with regard to the point spread that he wants to talk about. And it's the game that will go Sunday at 4:30, the 10-7 San Francisco 49ers, a wild card team, at the 12-5 Dallas Cowboys, the champions of the NFC East. The line opened Cowboys -3, which I'll talk about. I found that curious, and I'll come back to that later. Right now, I'm seeing a mix of 3s and 3.5s. I would say, in other words, Dallas favored by either 3 or 3.5, more 3s than 3.5s. So I'll let you choose your consensus line, and who do you like?
I like the 49ers. We'll try to get them at 3.5 if you could find them. We'll get into line shopping and the value of the 3 in a minute. You said Dallas went 12-5. I would argue they went 6-5 because their division is putrid, and they went 6-0 in their division, which grossly inflated their record. The 49ers, on the other hand, play in the toughest division in football. You talked about the first ever Monday Night Football playoff game. That's the Cardinals and the Rams. Those are two teams that the 49ers had to play 4 times combined. They're going to the playoffs. And the Seahawks are no slouch when you compare them to a sad sack team like the New York Giants. The way the Cowboys and Prescott were celebrating last week, beating up the Eagles' backups in a meaningless game, reeked of sad desperation to me, like an insecure guy. It was pathetic, I thought. I think the 49ers are at least as good as the Cowboys, if not marginally better. Home field in the NFL used to be worth 3 points to the spread. It's not anymore. The days of home field advantage are diminished because refs are no longer, I'm not going to call them corrupt. I'm going to call refs biased and influenced by 75,000 cheering fans. But with instant replay and challenges, it's just not worth the 3 it once was worth. So the 49ers are the value play. Again, we talked about the value of the 3 on the point spread. 8% of close games land exactly on 3. It's the most common and popular number. I'm sure a lot of bettors or listeners think 7 is the most popular number because that's a touchdown and the value of a touchdown, and they're not wrong. That's second at about 4 or 5%. The NFL, all numbers are not created equally. There's very few games that land on 9 or 2 or 12. A lot more now with the advent of the 2-pointer and the further extra point, and we can get to that on a later date. But the value is definitely on the 3. And if you can line shop to the 3.5, that's amazing. I would lock in the Niners plus 3.5. I want to note that if you're listening to this show in a day or two, as we discussed before, lines move. If bettors start pounding the 49ers, they're going to drop to 2.5. And anybody listening to this is going to be like, what's Harley talking about? Or he's a hack because he got it at 3.5. Lines move. There's actually, for the more sophisticated or savvy betting listeners, there's something called CLEV or CLV, meaning closing line value. And the theory is if you can lock in a line that's better than the closing line, it's like you beat the market. So, for example, if you bought Rodgers stock at $47 and it closes the week at $50, you just made yourself some value right there and then.
All right. I do want to point out a couple of things. And one is that this line opened Cowboys -3, right? And if you look at their records, and the 49ers just barely squeaked in, right? They basically had to win an overtime game last week against the Rams just to get into the postseason.
Correct.
To me, the books made a statement with that line saying they actually think the 49ers are as good as the Cowboys. Do you agree with that?
Actually, they're saying they think the 49ers are superior to the Cowboys. Yeah. They know the betting public loves the Cowboys. They're America's team. They know the betting public just watched a primetime Saturday game last week where the Cowboys annihilated the Eagles and Elliott and Prescott looked as good as they could. They know the 49ers just barely squeaked in. So based on everything the bettors just saw, logic would dictate, especially with the Cowboys at home, they should be a pretty big favorite. The fact that they only opened at 3, knowing guys would pound Dallas, is because they know sharp bettors, if they can get their 3.5s on the 49ers, are going to bet it all day long.
Okay. The other thing that needs to be pointed out is you're breaking my heart because I'm a lifelong Cowboy fan. So I'm just putting that out there now. Those who know me are well aware, but anybody who's new, it's out there. So I'm not going to agree with your pick. But the other really important point you made, and then we'll move off this game, is A, check the lines. We're recording this on Friday morning. Lines can move. COVID, right, the COVID situation can change at any moment in time. So please don't add us if the line moved because some key player got COVID. But just keep an eye on the line if you haven't made your bet already. All right.
One caveat, Jorey. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with closing line value. If the line goes in Dallas's favor, and I got a bad line on the 49ers, just because the betting public and the markets think Dallas is the better team, then I think it's a fair tweak. Then I didn't get the best line I could have on the 49ers, but you're right. Most of the big line movement is injuries and COVID now.
All right. Now, when you look at a line, if you're looking online, a lot of the time you'll see the point spread, and then you'll see another number that is generally bigger, and it's called the over-under total. And to put it very simply, you're betting on the total points scored in the game, and you're betting either over or under. And the one thing that I will say, and I know you'll agree, and then you'll give us a pick because you like one of the totals in the wild card games this week, is that the public loves betting over, right? Because how fun is it to watch a game and root for no goals or no points or the least amount possible, right? And the books know this. The value in general is always on the under. I'll let you expand upon that and give us your pick this week on one of the wild card games.
Okay, so I'm going to use the Cincinnati Raiders playoff game, the first playoff game, to use as an example.
Yeah, that's Saturday at 4:30. Saturday at 4:30, and the total.
That's also my bet. I like under. If you can get the 49, that's amazing. If not, maybe you're locked in at 48.5. So yeah.
I'll just jump in. It opened 49. It's now mostly 48.5. So people have been betting under.
I thought that number was too high. Just so our listeners understand, if you bet under 49 or over 49, and the final score in the game is 28-21, which adds up to 49, it's what's called a push or a refund. You basically get your bet back as if it's no bet. So you cheered for a long time, you got your money back. It's really the nightmare for sports books because they're operating under that thing. A couple of Super Bowls actually ended up in pushes, including the Rams-Titans Super Bowl. If you remember that one where the Titans were stopped at the 1 yard line.
Yeah, the 1 inch line, yeah.
The Rams were a 7-point favorite in that game the entire 2 weeks. They closed as a 7-point favorite. They won as a 7-point favorite. Vegas takes in hundreds of millions of dollars of bets. And then at the end, there's the longest lineup they've ever had where everybody's just getting a refund. And there's nothing more for them to bet on. The Super Bowl just finished. So there are pushes or ties. You're right. Generally speaking, there's value on the under for the reason you said. People like betting over and cheering for points, especially in primetime games, NFL playoff games. Nobody wants to watch running into the line of scrimmage, 30 seconds goes off the clock, and then a punt or a missed field goal. Pretty boring stuff to cheer for unless what you care about is cheering for value and points and grinding out a few cents. So that's the value on the under in general. I really like it in this game for a couple of reasons. One, these are newbie teams to the playoffs. This is the first dance, and they're going to be nervous. When you have nerves and you're likely to make mistakes, the coaches help you out by making it easier for you early in the game. They don't take big risks. They don't do 40-yard passes. You know, when you're watching a game and it's 3rd and 9 and your team runs a draw to get 3 yards, the clock ticks off for 30 more seconds and then you punt. You know who's cheering? Underbetters. Those are the only people that like draws on 3rd and 9. I see both coaches playing that way early on. I know everybody's obsessed with Cincinnati quarterback Joe Burrow, but since he has another star named Joe, and that's Joe Mixon, their great running back, and he can run the ball, he's going to have success doing that against the Raiders. They're the favorite Cincinnati at home, and they can also play ball control in the clock. The weather's supposed to be sub-zero in Cincinnati tomorrow. That's pretty damn cold. Again, running the ball with some success in the cold is easier than passing, drop passes, etc. You add it all up, so I like the unders in general, especially in primetime games. Running of Cincinnati and the cold weather, and under 48.5 is pretty good. Wait patiently and ideally get it under 49.
The other thing I will just add to that, and why I think it makes sense as a play, is while everybody, you said, has been really excited about Joe Burrow, and justifiably so for a lot of the season, and the great skill position talent that he has around him, especially with the 3 wide receivers, and you mentioned Mixon. The Raiders have an excellent pass rush, and the Bengals struggle on the offensive line in protecting Joe Burrow. He was sacked, I think, in the top 3 most sacked quarterbacks this year. So running the ball may be a big part of the game plan for the Bengals to try and protect Burrow and open up the play action game where those receivers get open and do damage down the field. Here's what I'm going to say in terms of picks this weekend for myself for Super Wildcard Weekend. Well, the general statement I want to make, and I'll see if you agree, about the NFL is never before in this league has there been more parity. The difference between the best team and the worst team, that gap is closer than ever. And in particular, among the better teams that make the playoffs or contend, because there are no great teams anymore. Every single team has flaws, from the Green Bay Packers, who had the best record in the league, on down to the bottom. But in terms of just the team, the 14 teams in the playoffs, there is not much of a gap. And you've got some big spreads this weekend. To me, the value are in the dogs. I don't think the Steelers have much a chance of winning the game in Kansas City. It wouldn't surprise me if they got blown out, but they can cover that spread. The Eagles are almost double-digit favorites at Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay still, even though they're getting some guys back, they're not fully healthy. They're not the same team that made the great playoff run last year. I think there's some value there. And the Raiders played 6 of their 17 games this year were decided on the last play of the game. 4 of them in overtime, they won all 4. So the one thing about the Raiders, especially playing better teams with the exception of the Chiefs, who have their number, they play close games. So to me, there's a lot of value in the dogs, and I'd even throw Arizona on Monday night as a 4-point underdog against the Rams. So to me, I think there is value in the dogs. I'm not saying which one. Pick the one you like, but I think that's, at least on 4 of the games, there's some value there. How do you feel?
I like it, Jorey. As we said, I also do videos for the parlay, and my video for the parlay was going to be published around the same time as this podcast. I did it a couple days ago, and I took the Eagles. I thought that the line was too big against Tampa. We know Brady's the GOAT, and Hurts has won 12 games, and Brady's won 7 Super Bowls. But Brady doesn't annihilate teams, especially in the playoffs. They win and they move on. And we talked about that primetime Cowboys game, and the Eagles looked pretty foolish on primetime, but it was their backups.
Yeah, but it was all second stringers.
Exactly. And I thought there was value there. Big Ben, 12.5 points is a lot of points to lay on any team in the playoffs. And I agree with you. The days of the dynasties are long gone. Even the Patriots, the modern day dynasty of the New England Patriots, with Belichick and Brady, weren't annihilating teams in the playoffs the way the 49ers and the Cowboys used to 15, 20 years ago. I would even look at any thoughts, the Patriots and the Bills. I mean, that'll be a close matchup. That's a good game.
I'm really on the fence. Right now, it's going to be really cold there. But no, I remember the Wind Bowl on a Monday night
was insane.
Earlier in the season when New England threw 3 passes and won the game. Wind looks like it's not going to be a factor on Saturday night, but it's going to be brutally cold. To me, it comes down to Josh Allen, right? He's the difference maker for Buffalo. That offense is not as good and as consistent as it was a year ago. And I think he's going to be the key to the game, just as he was when the Bills won the rematch 2 weeks after that Wind Bowl. That's number one. And then the other key is going to be, can the Bills stop the run? They're the number one scoring defense. They're the number one passing defense, but they struggle against the run. That's what cost them when they lost the first matchup. So everybody in divisional games, it's very hard. It's all about execution. It's always about execution, to be frank, but more so when divisional foes are playing for the third time in a season because the teams know each other so well. You're not going to surprise the other team a whole lot. So I think, can Buffalo stop the run, and can Josh Allen make plays with both his arm and his legs? That's the key. If you're asking me to make a pick, slight lean to Buffalo, who right now are pretty much a 4-point favorite across the board on the numbers that I'm seeing. All right. One other concept yeah, go ahead.
I say Josh Allen's legs are the difference in the game. That's the wild card factor. He's a beast. He's hard to bring down. In the cold, it'll wear on you. He'll bail them out at least twice on third down, once to run some clock to end the game, and once to score points maybe before the half. And I like the Bills.
I think the Bills are the better team. I think the Patriots, when they had their run, were beating up on nobodies, on the poor sisters, if you will. And I don't want to say they're a fraud because, hey, it's Belichick, but I do think the Bills are the better team. And like I said, I would lean Bills. 4 points scares me because I do think it'll be close. All right, one more betting concept to cover today, and it's called a future bet. Now, a lot of people don't like future bets, especially long-term ones, because you have to tie your money up for a long period of time. On the flip side, a lot of people enjoy that because they may not want to bet all the time, but they have a rooting interest, let's say, for a whole season, right? What's your take on futures?
For starters, let's go back a step and explain what a future bet is.
Yeah.
It's a bet on a future event. The most popular future bet that exists is who's going to win the championship in any sport. Right. So you can bet right now on who's going to win the Stanley Cup, who's going to win the Super Bowl. You can also bet who's going to win the World Series. And the Blue Jays are not the favorites, obviously. That's the Dodgers, and then comes the Astros. But the Blue Jays are a top 5 or 16. And future markets are an amazing source for casual bettors. Bet365 probably has the most future bet offers on hand, and it's probably a website worth visiting if you're just a curious fan that wants to know what your team's chances are of winning a championship. I like futures. I think you can get a lot of value with futures. I think for casual fans, it's also a great way to bet $100 on a team you like. If you love the Blue Jays and you really like baseball, you can even bet a team to win the National League. You take a shot with the Phillies. Right. And then all of a sudden, all the Philly games matter. And then the other divisional matchups, you're cheering against the Mets. And I mean, you've got hundreds of games of action for a single bet. We'll get into the math later. The problem with futures is because it's only a single bet for a long time and there's more volatility, the juice on it tends to be 20, 30, sometimes 50%, depending on the sports book. So it's really, really hard to win, and you got to be very, very careful. But let's look at the futures for the Stanley Cup this year. Everybody in Ontario wants to know, can the Leafs finally win the Cup? And the short answer is, of course they can, and they probably will in a year where we won't even be able to watch them play or have a parade. The Leafs right now are plus 750 or 7.5 to 1 to win the Cup. That means if you risk $100, you make $750 a profit or get back $850. Right. It's important to note that's the same as a European odds that would be written as 8.50. Because that just means you get back 8.5 times your amount. Plus 750 is the same as 8.50. we'll go through odds in a later show and
Yes.
explain the difference between European and American odds and decimal odds and how to convert it. And we can do a math tutorial one time. That's one of my specialties. But for all intents and purposes, the Leafs at plus 750 means you get 7.5 times your money in profit. Once you net in juice, it means the Leafs are about 10% to win the Stanley Cup. 1 in 10 shot, pretty good. They're one of the favorites.
Yeah, they're the fourth. They're the fourth choice right now on the board.
Colorado's 5-1.
Yeah, no, to me,
7-1. Their arena in Florida looks like it's in a Doug Ford regime. They're in lockdown all the time with no attendance. Tampa's 7-1. Vegas is 8-1. Carolina's 10-1. Those are the favorites. And if people are interested in the Canadian teams, Calgary's 25-1. Edmonton's 28. The Jets are 35. And the Montreal Canadiens, fresh off a Stanley Cup appearance, are 1,000-1.
And don't forget the Senators at 400-1. So just quickly on future bets, I'm never one to bet the favorites because I don't find there's value, right, in betting the favorites on futures. So is there anybody sort of, in the middle of the pack? Like, I mean, I look like at a Washington Capitals at 17-1. To me, that makes some sense as there's some value. They have every bit as chance, I believe, as the favorites to win it based on their performance this year and the fact that they're a perennial playoff team and Ovechkin is having an unbelievable year at his age. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for as well?
Yeah, I like the Capitals. They're in a division.
Oh, I didn't ask you to agree with me on the Capitals. I'm just saying to me, that's a value play.
The Capitals, they're in a division with the Penguins and the Hurricanes. The way the NHL works, you've got to look at the division and sweat out the division because you're playing your first 2-round matchups against them. Yeah. If you get kind of lucky and you're the Caps and you end up facing off against the Rangers, I know they're having a great season, but they're still not rated as high as Carolina and Pittsburgh. I don't mind the Caps. My bet is similar to that. I like the Nashville Predators at 22-1. They're currently leading the division. I know Colorado is going to overtake them. But besides Colorado, the West is weak. If you look at all the teams we talked about, Colorado and Vegas are in the West. But everybody else, Tampa, Florida, the Leafs. Who am I missing here?
The Bruins, the Hurricanes.
The Bruins, the Hurricanes. Everybody else is in the East except for Vegas and Colorado. So the road or the path to the Stanley Cup is easier in the Western Conference. Nashville doesn't get the love most teams would get with 50 points in 38 games because they're in a small market down south. They don't have a flashy scorer in the top 10. And you'll hear this theme a lot on this show. Ugly is good. Ugly means value. The less flashy you are, the chances are you're below the radar, but you're a good, gritty team. And come May, Nashville at 22-1 to me seems like a pretty good pick.
All right, we want to address one other future bet scenario, and that is on a shorter event. And that it's very prevalent in golf and tennis, right? A single tournament. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the first major of the year on the tennis calendar, the Australian Open, starts Monday down under, Sunday night here. You'll be able to see matches Sunday night on TV. And tennis has become certainly a lot more popular in Canada of late because we're good at it. I should point out that we're missing a couple key Canadians in this year's Australian Open. Milos Raonic, who's become kind of the forgotten man in Canadian tennis circles with the emergence of Felix, Auger-Aliassime, and Denis Shapovalov. And Bianca Andreescu, 2019 U.S. Open champion, is not down under injury, health-related concerns, so she's not there. But Felix and Shapo are in the men's draw. Leila Fernandez and Rebecca Marino qualified several hours ago. She'll be in. There's not going to be any odds on her. She'll be part of the field. And so we want to talk a little bit about the Australian Open. And on the men's side right now, we have to point out that as of this moment, Novak Djokovic, the number one seed, the number one player in the world, and 9-time champion, is in the draw, and there are odds on him. However, his visa has been canceled again by the Australian government. However, Djokovic is appealing. So right now he's in the draw, and we have to consider that he's going to play, although I would tend to think that
He's not
he's
playing
probably
great.
going to be taken out, and thus the odds are going to change. But we can only go with what we're dealing with right now, right?
So why don't we start talking about the men, because you talked about Jokey. I wrote an article last week that I would bet on almost anybody you liked in it because I didn't think Jokey was going to play in this event. The event is in Melbourne. Melbourne locked down their citizens for 260 days. This is a first world Western country that tried to stamp out COVID. COVID's out of control. And a guy who's almost a poster boy for COVID's a joke, anti-vaccine, now lied on his application and said he didn't travel when he did travel. You really think they're going to let him play in this tournament? This has become too political. They're going to find a way to get rid of the Joker. And once they get rid of the Joker, the other favorites, Medvedev is currently plus 150. Zverev is 3-1. And then the two Canadians, Aliassime is 50-1. Shapovalov is 80-1. Maybe it's their opportunity to shine. For the listeners and viewers who don't know, Jorey, you are a 50-plus star. In fact, there's a challenge out there to any listener or viewer of our show. Ontario, if you're over 50 years old, and I'm willing to bet you that Jorey kicks your ass in tennis.
Well,
you're the expert.
There's at least a couple people I know that would take that bet, but they may not be listening. So just be careful. And thank you again.
My chances. I like your odds, Jorey. Why don't you talk about the two Canadian men and the bracket on the men's side first?
Very quickly, the one thing I will point out when you're looking at betting, to win or go to the final, which is an option when you're betting a tennis tournament, is if you know the sport, you have to look at the draw, right? Because it matters which quarter you're in, which section you're in to begin, because the field is so deep. And you know how you hear any given Sunday in the NFL that any team can beat any team, which is 100% true. In tennis, pretty much anybody in the top 100 can beat anybody else on a single day. The difference in the Grand Slams is it's best of 5 sets. And that makes it a little more difficult to knock off the top dogs. Mm-hmm. So just as a general note, if you're going to bet tennis tournaments, take a look at the draw. So with regard to Felix and Shapo, the two Canadians, Felix Auger-Aliassime and Denis Shapovalov, you mentioned Felix is at 50-1, Shapo is at 80-1. Both of them do not have a great draw. I've taken a look at it, and there are minefields all over the place, and I would even suggest that Shapo's draw is a little tougher. Now, that assumes that the seeded players advance. So if there's upsets, that can change at any point in time. But you kind of have to project and look at it that way. I would say there's probably a little bit more value on Felix than Shapo because of the draw. So Felix at 50-1 is worth a play. In terms of mid-level guys, like one of the higher seeds, but there's some value because as we talked about with the Stanley Cup odds, I'm not playing the favorites because there's no real value there unless you firmly believe that Medvedev is winning this tournament. Okay, so then you bet at plus 150. You're not going to make a huge profit. Go ahead, or Zverev, and that's assuming Joker's not in there. Rafa Nadal, by the way, who's only won the Australian Open once of his 20 Grand Slams, he was at 10-1. He's now dropped to 7-1 in the last day. But my value plays are as follows. The young Italian, Yannick Sinner, who has just been rising now for the past 3 years and is just outside the top 10. He's at 20-1. His draw's not bad. There's good value there. He is on the verge of breaking through at a Grand Slam. It may be in Australia. To go a little further down, Casper Ruud, the Norwegian. Yes, a Norwegian who had an amazing year a year ago. He's good on the hard courts. He's at 66-1. I would take a look at him as a value play. And then if you want a longer dog, my long dog play is Riley Opelka, the big serving American who's at 150-1. And from all the reports I've heard, the court is pretty fast in Australia. For those who don't know tennis, the speed of the court matters. Clay being really slow, grass generally being the quickest. Hard courts can be as quick as grass, but some are slower than others. And with a faster court, the big servers tend to have an advantage. So he's my long play at longer odds. Riley Opelka.
Love it. Love it. Let's talk about the women a little bit. It's too bad there's no Bianca. Like you said, Canadian Leylah Fernandez is 33-1. Ash Barth is the favorite at 3-1. Then we got Osaka at 6-1. And I think you told me there's some funky brackets going on the women's side. So what's your thought and the impact of the brackets on the women's side of the Oz Open?
Yeah, so it is a shame that Bianca's not there for the Canadian representation. But as I mentioned, Rebecca Marino qualified, and she's a great story. Go look her up. Amazing sort of comeback story for her. So if anybody can beat anybody on the men's side, that's even more true on the women's side. I mean, it's really a crapshoot. Barty is now, been the number one player in the world now for pretty much 3 years. She's won 2 slams. She's never won at home. She's coming in good form, won one of the warm-up tournaments last week. But again, I'm not looking at the favorites. What's really interesting is Aryna Sabalenka is the 2nd seed in the tournament, the number 2 player in the world. She's like the 10th or 11th choice right now. So is there value there? I think the books know something, and I think they're right. I wouldn't look at her. So here's who I'm looking at from a value standpoint. Victoria Azarenka, who's a veteran. She left the tour, had a baby. She's been back now for a couple of years. She has won the Australian Open. She's performed very well on hard court. I think her draw's not bad, and she's at 33-1. So I would look at her. Leylah Fernandez, the Canadian sensation who got to the final of the U.S. Open last year, she's at 40-1. Her draw is brutal. But having said that, her draw was brutal at the U.S. Open, and she just kept knocking off former Grand Slam champs and top 10 players like it was nothing. I don't think there's a repeat here, but at 40-1, I take a look at it. The 40-1 that I do like is pretty much an unknown player for most casual fans, and that is Ons Jabeur. She's Tunisian. She's by far the best and highest ranked ever Arab player on the WTA Tour. She's also at 40-1. She cracked the top 10 last year and has been rising steadily for 2 years. I would look at her. And the other longer shot pick I would look at is Belinda Bencic from Switzerland. She's at 80-1. Her draw's not bad. A little concerned about her form coming in because she got knocked out early in one of the warm-up tournaments heading into the Australian Open. But she's been a Grand Slam finalist. Hard court is generally her best surface. And she's tough. She's mentally tough. And so at 80-1, I think she's worth a look.
Like it.
This is role reversal here because most of the time it's going to be me asking you who you like.
Yeah,
I'll take it for tennis. I'm not sure how you are on golf.
Everybody's got to learn what they're not good at or stay away, and that's going to be a common theme to this show also. I'm not a tennis expert. I don't follow it that much. The only read I had on this tournament was to bet the men who aren't Joker because I didn't think he was going to play in it. And other than that, I'll watch the tournament, cheer for the Canadians, and see how it plays out.
Yes, always rooting for the Canadians. That goes without saying. The other thing we're going to do on this show is cover gambling news stories. And that can be a variety of different topics, issues, things of that nature. Well, this past Sunday night was one of the wildest sports betting nights in a long time. And there's many, and they happened because there were 2 events. One was the craziness surrounding the Sunday night game, right? Between the Chargers and the Raiders that went to overtime. And we won't spend a long time on it, but basically a ton of bettors used the tie in that game, either straight up or they parlayed it with the result, like the Jacksonville Jaguars beating the Indianapolis Colts as a huge favorite as a money line dog. We'll tell you what a money line, what the money line dog means and what money line bets are probably as early as next week. I think we're going to do it next week. But it was wildness as that game should have been a tie had the Chargers not called a late timeout. I don't want to rehash the whole game, but
I like that
was
coach. He's sharper than everybody else. But anyways, we could discuss coaching.
Staley. I do too, but he may have erred in that situation and cost his team a playoff spot. But social media was just going nuts over that game. But earlier in the evening, as I reach over to grab a note, while that was going on, Klay Thompson returned after 2.5 years away. He hadn't played a game in the NBA since Game 6 of the 2019 Finals against the Raptors because he got injured in that game, and then prior to last year, tore his Achilles. In any case, he came back for the Golden State Warriors on Sunday night. Draymond Green had tightness in his lower calf while warming up for that game, but he wanted to start to honor Klay Thompson's return. So follow the timing here quickly. 8:31, the Warriors' public relations Twitter feed posts that Green would be on the court for tip-off, but would not participate in the rest of the game. 8:31. The game tipped off at 8:40. The Athletic, I think also at 8:31, tweeted out this info, as did some other reporters who caught wind of it. And so there were proposition bets, which we'll also explain in a later show, for Draymond Green in that game, like total points and rebounds and assists. And before the sports books, some pulled it down quickly, but many didn't pull those prop bets off the board. And they got hammered with under bets. I'll let you take it from here.
The sports books were sloppy. If they don't have somebody monitoring risk management and social media and Twitter, that's not great. Obviously, if you know Draymond Green is only playing for 7 seconds, he's not going to score the 12 points or the 5 rebounds or the 3 assists or whatever the over-under is. So you can bet the unders. We're also going to cover parlays next week, but you could parlay those bets. So long story short, you could make 7 times your money, and it was as much of a lock as you're ever going to get in sports. Now, I trashed the books a little bit. The league deserves the most trashing. Shame on the NBA. The NBA has to get their shit together. This is a league that wants to make millions of dollars on licensing and gambling and integrity, and they made a mockery out of their league by allowing this fiasco to go on. You can't have guys play but not play ceremoniously and then pass off the game. Imagine LeBron James's last game. What's going to happen with 20 seconds to go? Should we all part the way so LeBron could end on a dunk? And what happens if that dunk makes the over instead of the under? Millions and millions and millions of dollars are switching hands. The reason people gamble for millions and millions and millions of dollars on the NBA and the NFL is because they trust the integrity of the league. I've been on Rogers. I've been on the Blue Jays. I've been on sports teams in Canada for a while. I've been on the CFL, who just is way behind the 8 ball, on how much more seriously they have to take the integrity of their sport when it comes to things like tipping off players and injuries. And the NBA cannot allow this to go on. They've got to know better. The teams need to know better. Management needs to know better. It doesn't cost that much to have a $150,000 a year geek on the sidelines of every team being like, guys, this isn't kosher. You can't be doing this in a league where people are betting real money. So shame on the NBA for allowing this to happen. And the NBA should be writing a check to DraftKings for $2 million.
Right. And so just to wrap this up, the leagues, this is a lesson for all the leagues, that they have to figure out how to get this information to sportsbooks, some of which they're partnered with, right? They have marketing partnerships, et cetera, to be able to get this information to them so they are not exposed in the way that they were. And then the other thing was, like DraftKings initially didn't pay the underbettors. Most of the other books voided the overbets and paid the underbets. And you give the books a lot of credit for doing that. DraftKings delayed, but ultimately made the right decision. So we want to point out that the bettors did get paid. And this is something that, as a bettor, you can be on the lookout for information that gives you an edge. If you get it, you better act quickly. All right, that's good. Go ahead.
The books paid out largely because they had no choice. He played, he started. Unless your rules are ridiculously written, that says if a player starts or plays for reason of show or whatever it is, it was going to be very tough. The one thing I did want to mention, Jorey, is you talked about how crazy Sunday was. You didn't even mention the fact that New York launched their sports betting on the weekend. Yeah. And on Sunday, it was so successful that Caesars Online Sportsbook crashed for 3 hours on an NFL Sunday. So another note to sportsbooks on top of risk management. It happened last year to DraftKings and FanDuel on the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is a big deal. The last NFL Sunday of the year is a big deal. Again, I am far from a technology whiz, but hire a technology whiz and make sure you have the bandwidth so you don't crash the day you launch.
All right, that's going to do it for the first edition of the Parleh Sports Betting Show with Jorey and Harley. We'll be with you each and every week on Canada's sports betting network, which is the Parleh. A reminder, we want to hear your questions, your comments, your picks, all of it. Email questions@theparleh.com. You can hit us both up on Twitter. Our handles are right there in front of you on the screen, and you can use the hashtag ParlehSBS. Next week, we are going to talk about the money line, parlays, teasers, and of course, break down the NFL divisional round, playoffs, and a whole lot more. So hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you next week.